Well, Mike, I think we can start now.
Okay, is everybody ready? Hello, everybody.
I hope so. Everyone is ready. So, a grand welcome to you, Mike, and a very good evening to all of you out there. Before we
Thank you
move
very
ahead,
much.
let me just give a very brief introduction of Mike. Mike graduated with his Cambridge University, Delta, and postgraduated in corporate communication and is currently finishing his MA in Education, TESOL. He has trained thousands of teachers for governments, universities, and education institutes throughout Asia, Europe, and the Americas. As well as training teachers, Mike has 25 years experience teaching adults, young and very young learners, exam prepared Cambridge, IELTS, TOEFL, academic English, CAMS, English for specific purposes, STEM, pronunciation, and online teaching. He has managed schools and taught in Canada, Cambodia, China, Costa Rica, Czech Republic, France, and many other countries. He also has published teaching books, presented at numerous conferences, and sat on TESOL boards of directors. So, Mike, would you like to add some more, or you want to proceed ahead with the session today?
I think you said everything, Sushmita. You make me sound so old.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, we can proceed ahead, Mike. It's all yours.
Yes. So as Sushmita says, I'm a bit of a dinosaur in this industry. I've traveled around and I've watched thousands of teachers teach in countries all over the world. So I'm not only going to tell you the theory about tonight's session, but I'm going to show you how it actually works. Okay, from what I've observed in many classrooms about this session, whether you're teaching adults or teaching children or teaching university students, it doesn't matter the age, the level. This session applies to everything. Okay, let's get started. So tonight's session is about learning styles, and it's mainly multiple intelligence theory. But I'll quickly mention at the end of our session the two other theories, because there are three theories around learning styles. So, first of all, what does learning styles mean? Can anyone tell me? No, nobody knows. Okay. When we learn, we have preferences in the way that we learn. Okay? So many teachers tend to treat all of their students the same. You walk into a class, you say, okay, I have these students, I can teach them all the same way. But what we forget to realize is that students have different ways of learning. So maybe you plan something for your class, and some students are really interested and they pay attention. Okay? Maybe you've used a lot of pictures, for example, in your class and video, and the students are really interested. But there are some students in your class that aren't interested. Their attention wanders and they don't look. And one of the reasons might be because they have a different preference to the way they learn. So you're teaching students that prefer to learn with their eyes, but there are students that maybe prefer to learn with their hands. And so as teachers, especially language teachers, we need to realize that our students are not all the same. If you go into a classroom and teach 20 students, you don't have them all thinking the same way. You have them thinking a different way because of their own preferences. Okay, so there are three main theories behind what we call learning styles when we look at individual learners. One is a theory based on intelligence, and that is called multiple intelligence theory, okay, which is what our session is about tonight. There's another one that's kind of perceptual basis. It's based on how people perceive things, the senses, like the eyes and the ears. And the last theory, which is very old-fashioned, is more a cognitive, the way the brain works. Okay? So these are the three theories. So let's start with the first one, the one that's the most important, okay? The one that's the most popular as well. And that's called MIT, which stands for Multiple Intelligence Theory. Okay, in the past, how do we check our students' intelligence? Any guesses? No? I'm just wondering if you can hear me or if I'm talking to myself. Can you hear me,
How they
Sushma?
react to the questions, how they respond in a class, how active they are in a class.
Yeah. So my question is, how do we normally check our students' intelligence? Anybody ever hear of IQ? Oh yes, Harpreet. Yes. What? Tell us.
Sir, it's good evening. It is my guess. It could be through their sight learning, through their kinesthetic skills, um, through hand-on learning skills, how practically they're learning, their decision
Let, let me stop for. Let me rephrase the question. Is there a way, a test we have to check our students' intelligence? Okay. Has anyone heard of an IQ test? Raise your hand if you've heard of an IQ test before. No? Okay, a few people. Okay. So traditionally, IQ tests are the way to check our students' intelligence level. Right? Where do they come from? IQ tests come from, they came from Paris originally. There was a professor of he was a French psychologist, and this French psychologist in France back in 1916, so more than 100 years ago, and he wanted to see if he could tell the intelligence of kindergarten children in France, because then they could predict who would become very intelligent in the future. So this man was named Alfred Binet. And Alfred Binet designed the IQ tests in France in 1904. He designed them. Okay. Now, these tests became popular in France, and in 1916, they were brought to America by Stanford University. It was actually two men, Goddard and Terman. Okay, but they were picked up by Stanford University. Now, these IQ tests started to be used in the US at the university level as entry tests. So when people wanted to go into university in America, they had to do a type of IQ test. Now, these tests expanded and they became what? Do you know? SATs. Do you know SATs? Okay. SATs are a test you have to take in America before you go into university. And SATs are based on IQ tests. Okay? Now, a lot of other tests, standard tests, came out of IQ tests. Okay? So we had the SATs, the GMATs, the LSATs. Okay? Most of the main testing done in the US and around the world were IQ tests. And from those, they developed other tests. Okay? These tests, these IQ tests, were so important. They were considered one of the top 20 discoveries of the 20th century, okay? Equal to the invention of radio, DNA, and flight, as well as nuclear science. Okay? IQ tests were one of the top 20 inventions of the last century. Now, what do you think about IQ tests? Can IQ tests work? Do you think there's any problems with IQ tests? Okay, there was a man that came around in the 1980s, and he said at least 4 criticisms about IQ tests. First of all, they favor analytical people. So if you prefer science and math, you will do better on an IQ test than somebody that prefers art and painting and theater and stuff like that. If you think logically, you will do higher on an IQ test than somebody else. A second criticism is that IQ tests are culturally biased. Okay? If you gave an IQ test to an African boy and to an American boy, who do you think would get a higher score? Probably the American boy, because he's been in more schools. But if you put both boys into the middle of a desert, who would survive the longest? Probably the African boy, because he knows more about the desert and about living off the land. So we would say the American boy is smarter. He has a higher score. But the African boy would live longer. So they're biased towards cultures. Okay? They're also biased to more well-off people. People who have a lot of money send their children to better schools. Those children score higher on IQ tests. Poor people that don't have so much money might not score as high on IQ tests because they haven't had as much schooling. So it favors analytical people. It's prejudice against well-off people. And two, it's culturally biased. Thirdly, it doesn't show true potential, right? If you take a child that's a gang leader, he doesn't go to school, lives on the street, and he's the leader of a gang. Okay? He has to know how to manage people. He has to know how to react in stressful environments. He has to think fast. He has to take risks. A leader of a gang on the street has the same qualities as the CEO of a big company. And yet we would say, well, that boy's not smart. He can't score high on an IQ test. Okay? So it doesn't show our true potential. You can probably think of many people in the world that are very successful, but they might not have gone to school. My brother stopped taking school when he was young, and yet he has many businesses now. Not because he scored high in IQ, but just because he taught himself and learned. Okay, so now the person that made these criticisms was a professor at Harvard University. His name was Howard Gardner. Now, Professor Gardner wrote a book in 1983 called Frames of Reference. I think it was Frames of Mind. Frames of Mind. And he said all these criticisms about IQ tests. And he had a better theory. He said there's not one intelligence. There are actually 8 different intelligences. Okay? So there is a logical intelligence, which IQ tests check. But there's also a musical intelligence. So like Mozart would not score high on an IQ test, but Mozart was a musical genius. He had high musical intelligence. Or somebody that's interpersonal, okay, is good with people, would score high in that area, kind of people intelligence. Okay, so Gardner says there are 8 intelligences, not one. And Gardner said that everybody in the world has all 8 intelligences. Now, some have higher intelligence in some areas and some have lower in others. Like Mozart had high musical intelligence, but low logical intelligence. Einstein might have high logical intelligence, but low musical intelligence. Okay? So we all have these intelligences at different levels. Another thing he said is that intelligence is based on experience. So we can change our intelligence. If my musical intelligence is low, I can study music, okay, learn to play instruments, read music, and my musical intelligence can go higher. So before, IQ tests said intelligence is based on genetics. Somebody is intelligent because they got it from their parents. They get a number, and that's their number for the rest of their life. But Gardner says, no, we have different types of intelligence, and we can change those. We can grow them by changing our experience. And he said this, I have a quote from him. He said, "The current approaches to teaching is to teach for a test, because the tests are so important for the teacher and for the parents." Okay? So teachers must only teach in one way. And this doesn't help people that have these different intelligences. It makes a lot of sense. He didn't say, let's change the way in education is, but he says, we need to look at this in order to understand our students. He said, there's no point in doing anything with multiple intelligence if you think you're doing a good job as a teacher. But if things are not going so well in your classroom, and there are certain kids that you cannot reach, that's when the teacher has to look at multiple intelligence and consider it. Very important. And a lot of people believe that Gardner was right. And that's why IQ tests are not so popular anymore in schools, and multiple intelligence is very popular. Okay? So let's imagine you're in the classroom and the students are doing some work. And one student gets up and he runs over and he asks the other students. You say, hey, sit down, do your work. He sits down, he gets up, he runs over again. You get angry, you tell him to sit down. He does it a third time and you punish him. This is not right, because you're punishing him because he's not sitting there quietly and being an analytical learner. But this child might be what we call an interpersonal learner. Perhaps he learns best by sharing information with other people. He learns what you're teaching by sharing it with other friends in the classroom, not by working by himself. If a teacher doesn't know this, the teacher is not going to help this student. If the teacher knows this, the teacher is going to say, okay, you work with this person over here, because that's going to help you best to understand. That's what we have to do with intelligence. Okay. Is there a question before I go on? Harpreet, did you have a question? I see some hands up.
I think we can take the questions after the session, Mike. That will be
Good
easier.
idea, Sushmit. Okay, so hold on to your questions and we'll have them afterwards. Okay, so we have 8 intelligences to consider with our students. Let's take a look at them. Now, there were originally 8 intelligences, but they actually brought them down to 7. One of the intelligence was called a naturalist intelligence. Okay? And these are people that are very high in nature. Okay, the environment and understanding. They like animals, they like trees, and so on. Now, as teachers, we're in the classroom, so that's very hard for us to develop our lessons and our classroom management based on that intelligence. So in the classroom, there are 7 intelligences that we work with. One of them, you know, is the logical and the mathematical. Those are the students that score high on an IQ test. Okay? Another one, I told you, is musical. Okay? These are students that prefer music. Okay? A third one is called kinesthetic. These are students that prefer to learn with their hands. Okay? They like to hold things, like to touch things. They like to do things, role plays, and so on. You have what we call spatial visual students, students that learn best by thinking. You have verbal linguistic, students that learn best by words and using words in the classroom. And then you have interpersonal and intrapersonal. Interpersonal are the students that need to share ideas with other people. They need to be around other people. And then you have the intrapersonal, and these are students that prefer to work by themselves. You know, you tell them to go and work in a group, and they sit there quietly by themselves. Okay? Probably, you know, if you teach in your class, you have all sorts of these types of students. The ones that want to be with people, the ones that are always moving their hands, those are the kinesthetic learners, or the musical learners. The ones that are always staring out the window, those are the visual learners, the spatial learners. Okay? The ones that want to see the grammar on the board, Those are the logical learners. Okay? So all 7 of these intelligences, all your students have. But they're going to be strong in 1 or 2. And if you can recognize which intelligence is strongest for them, you'll be able to plan your lesson for them. Or if you're using a lesson for everybody, you'll be able to go over and help that student better. Okay, so how do they think? First of all, we have the verbal linguistic. Okay? That's one intelligence. A student that is high in verbal linguistic, he thinks or she thinks in words. So the best way to teach that type of student is to do reading, writing, telling stories, books, tapes, games with words, discussions, debates, conversations in the class. This type of student loves anything to do with words. Okay? I'm like that. I love to read. I love to write. I like to work with words all the time. If I was learning a new language, I would want to see the sentences. I would want to write the sentences. I would want to use the words. I want to learn a lot of vocabulary because I am a verbal linguistic learner. Now, the logical mathematical learner, they learn by reasoning. Okay? In your class, they ask a lot of questions. They like to do puzzles. They like to look at the structure of the language, you know, the grammar, timelines, okay? They like to experiment with things. Now, thirdly, the spatial visual. This is a person that learns through images and pictures. So with this type of learner, you do a lot of drawing on the board. You get them to close their eyes and visualize things. Okay? They like to do mazes, imagination, designing, videos, pictures, anything that helps their eyes. Okay? So, for example, when I have spatial visual students and I want them to talk, I will do a guided visualization. I'll say to them, close your eyes. Think of your favorite restaurant. Who are you there? I will build the movie in their head because when they open their eyes, they're going to talk because they've seen it before. A kinesthetic learner learns through their bodily awareness. So you have to do things with their body. Drama, role play, movement, touching things. You're going to teach the word cup. You don't explain it. You show a cup so that they can hold the cup. Oh, yeah. And they will remember the word. Okay? So lots of movement activities with that type of learner. The musical learner learns through rhythms and melodies. You know the musical learner because they're always tapping their feet or tapping their fingers on the desk. Okay? Because they've got too much music in their blood, right? They have to move. Okay. The musical learner learns through songs, singing, okay? Taps, okay? Anything that has some kind of rhythm to move them. The interpersonal learner, as I said, learns by sharing ideas with other people. So you have to put them in lots of groups or pairs. Okay? They like to organize. They like to have clubs. So they like to be around people. This is the type of student that if you want them to work by themselves, it's very hard for them because that's not what they like. That's not how they enjoy their learning. The opposite, the intrapersonal learner, they learn by going in themselves. They like to be quiet. They like to have time alone. They like to have projects by themselves. And those are the 7 different types of learners. Okay. All right. So I'm going to tell you some learners here. These are typical students in your class. And see if you can guess, okay? We're not going to do this together, but think to yourself, if you can guess what type of intelligence they're high in. So the first is a student that asks you a lot of questions. They want to know, hey, how do I make the past present? The past simple. Okay? They ask you questions. This type of learner is
Linguistic.
Logical. Logical, because they're asking you questions. They want to understand how. They want to see the analysis of it. Okay. You got another student. He has lots of friends in class. This is a student that's intrapersonal, right? This interpersonal, he wants to be with other people. That's why he has a lot of friends. Then you have the other student, he's always alone in the corner, right? He never talks to anybody. This is the student that is intrapersonal. If you can recognize these students, you know how to help them. Then you have a student who's always doing more than one thing, right? He's listening to the teacher, he's got his phone chatting, and he's doing his math homework all at the same time. What type of student is this? This is a musical student. Students that are high in musical intelligence, they tend to be able to do many things at once because there's so much rhythm going on. I can do this, I can do this. It's kind of like a melody. Okay. Another student you have, he notices things very, very well. Stuff that other students don't notice. So you ask, okay, do you see anything in this text? And he says, yes, I see this, I see this. Everyone's like, oh, I didn't see it. That person, the first to do it, is actually high in musical intelligence. Students that are high in musical intelligence can notice things that other students can't. They're aware of things beyond normal, so they say. Okay, what about the girl in your class and she's always looking out the window? Hello, hello, teacher's over here. Why is she looking out the window and not at the teacher? Because the teacher is moving. It stops her picture in her head. If she looks out the window, she has a picture in her head that she can watch. So the secret to getting that student's attention is not to move her away from the window, but to have more visual input. Okay? So instead of talking, if you showed things with movies or pictures, that student will stop looking out the window and look at the teacher. And that's the secret to the student that's daydreaming. Okay? You have a student that likes to categorize. Oh, let's put the verbs here. Let's put the nouns there. This is a logical student. He has to see things logical. Okay. What about a student that likes to do role plays and interview? This is an interpersonal. They want to be with other person. It could also be a kinesthetic learner because they're doing something hands-on. They're not at their desk. They're moving, talking to another person, walking around, interviewing people. So it could be either kinesthetic or interpersonal. What about the student that can memorize the words and the grammar very easily? You know what student that is? That's the linguistic student. They can remember, for language is a lot about words. And so if you're teaching language to a verbal linguistic student, they tend to remember the words more. They probably do bad in other classes, but in language classes, verbal linguistic students often do the best. Okay. And there are other types of students. But the key thing is that when you're teaching your class, you plan your lesson. But if students are having trouble in your class, if they're not paying attention, they're not interested, not motivated, think about how you can change things for those students. So what I do is when I have a small class, like I had a student earlier today, and he was only one student, he's a beginner student, but I realized that he learns very visually. So I take my textbook and I don't go page by page, I try to bring things out visually. I show him pictures of things, okay? Or we do imagination exercises because I know that's going to help him to learn a lot faster. Okay. Okay. Good. And actually, you know, there's a famous MIT case in India. I think it's in India, where a guy moved there and he opened up a whole village and he practiced MIT to teach language, and it became very popular. I think his name was, I have the name here somewhere, Bruce Campbell. Bruce Campbell, but he did, and he wrote a story or an article about it. Now, if you want to know what type of intelligence you have, I suggest if you go online and you put in MIT, Multiple Intelligence Theory, and you put like test, you can get many tests. You can do that yourself and see what your high intelligence is. But sometimes if I have a small group, I might give one of those tests to my students because I want to know what the intelligence level is for my students. If you know what intelligence your students are high in, you're going to be a better teacher. You're going to plan better lessons, and you're going to help the students even better in class. Okay, good. And that's pretty much it on MIT, just to learn the 7 different intelligences, being able to recognize them in your students, and being able to plan your lessons accordingly to what your students prefer to learn. Before I talk about the other 2 theories, are there any questions about MIT? Can we ask some questions about that now, Sushmita?
We can do, Mike. We can do. Yes, we can ask.
Yeah, okay, so let me take some questions about MIT, multiple intelligence theory first, and then I'll talk about the other 2 theories, which are not as important as MIT. Okay, questions? Vipula?
Vipula, do you have any question you can put across, Mike?
Yeah, we'll have here Vipula and then Harmeet.
Yeah.
Harpreet. What's your question, Vipula?
Sir,
The multiple intelligence that you have mentioned, sir, how it is possible to handle this many kind of students in a class with a different intelligence? Like in a one class, it is difficult to handle this intelligences in students. So how we can manage students with different multiple intelligence?
Okay, so what I would do is first try to find out what intelligence most of my students have. Okay, so I might have some sort of game or test or something like that where they can tell. You know, walk around and ask your friends these questions. Oh, do you like movies? Oh, do you like sports and exercise? Then you can collect those sheets at the end. You say, oh, this student likes everything visual. It must be a visual learner. Or this student likes, drama, likes to play sports. They must be a kinesthetic learner. Okay, so finding out what your students are. Now, Vipula, you said if you have a lot of students, it's very hard to plan your lesson for only one intelligence. Okay, so doing this is a lot like teaching multiple levels. Right? If you have a class with, say, 40 children in the class, and they're different levels, you have to do what we call multi-level teaching, right? Or group teaching. You have some activities and tasks for lower levels and some activities for higher levels, but you use the same materials. So I have a story, the low levels read it and they draw a picture. I use the same story, and the medium level students, the intermediate students, have to answer questions. The high level students have to make a debate about it. Okay? So they're different activities, but it's the same material. The same when you cater to multiple intelligence theory, right? So I have the same activities, but over here in this group, they're going to watch a movie about the subject. Over here in this group, they're going to read. Over here in this group, they're going to act out the movie. Okay? One reads the script, one watches the movie, and one acts it out. The ones that are kinesthetic will do more acting out. The ones that are verbal linguistic will do more reading. The ones that are visual will do more watching of the movie. So it's the same thing. My objective here is to see if they understand, they comprehend this film. Although some have done reading, some have done watching, and some have done play acting. But if they do it successful, they show me they understand. They show me the comprehension. But I've done it in 3 different ways for 3 different types of learners. That's what I would suggest. Find out what your students' major intelligence is, and then if there's a lot of different intelligences, then maybe use your same material in different ways for those different intelligences. The other thing you can do, Vipula, is if you know their intelligences, it's going to help you with classroom management. Because you know if there's a child that's sitting alone all the time, you know, okay, maybe they're intrapersonal. So maybe I have to get that student to work alone a lot of times because they prefer that. So, or you see a girl and she's staring out the window. Okay, I know she's visual. So the way to get her to stop looking out the window and pay attention in class is to use more visuals in my class, to use more movies or pictures or something like that. Does
Okay,
that
okay.
answer your question? Yeah, yeah. Yep.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Harpreet, did you have a...
Yes, sir. Sir, my question is, in case the kids who have lower IQ, but when the test, they have to go and take test, and the test paper comes same for all the students, and they have to take the same test. So how would they manage? Because their IQ is lower than the other kids. So
Right.
in
So
India, we have only one single question paper for all categories.
that's a problem for us as educators, because tests are great for schools and parents, right? Parents can say, hey, my son is the best student. And the school can say, okay, you're going to this university and you're going to this university. But we as teachers know our students are not all the same. They think very differently. And we have to be prepared for that. So that's why IQ tests are not really popular anymore. And the problem, like I'm in Thailand right now, and the problem with some countries here, like Korea and China and Japan, is they've been catering their language classes for years just for the test. So when I was in Korea, Korea spends more money than any country in the world on private education. The students go to school and then they study in school afterwards. And they can all go and write tests for their exams. But when I lived in Korea, many people said they can't speak English because they spent all their school studying for these tests and not actually acquiring and using the language. So you're right, Harpreet, it's a bit of a problem for us because as teachers, the schools tell us, hey, you got to prepare them for the test. But we know our job is not to prepare them for the test. Our job is to get them to acquire the language, to be able to speak English. So we're kind of stuck in the middle, right? And that's what I hear from hundreds of teachers around the world is, hey, how can I help my students in the way you show me when the schools tell me I have to do it this way? There's not much we can do, right? You can talk to your school, or you help your, what I do is I help my students with the tests that the school tells me, but I also am aware of their learning styles, and I also help them with those things in class. I do both. Good question, though. Good question. Are there any other questions?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. No. Okay. So there's lots more that you could read about multiple intelligence theory. If you're interested, I suggest reading Howard Gardner's book called Frames of Mind. Okay, maybe Sushmita, I don't know, maybe you can write up the link or something if anyone's looking for the book. It's a very good book. It was written in 1983. And now a lot of people, even at the PhD level, they study MIT because it's so important and it's used all over the world now. And it's not only used in language teaching, but it's used in other fields and other classes and faculties. Okay, so I told you there were 3 theories on learning styles. The first one is multiple intelligence theory, and it's based on intelligence. A second big one is a perceptual theory, and this comes from a psychology in 1979 called neuro-linguistic programming. And in this psychology, there were 2 guys, a linguistic student, and I can't remember, what was the other guy? I think I have it here. Bandler and Grinder. One was a linguistic student and one was a speech therapist or something like that. I'll have to tell you. Anyways, these 2 gentlemen, they wanted to see how do successful people communicate. People that are millionaires, how do they communicate to become successful? So they studied a lot of them and they found out some different theories and they wrote down some techniques. One of the ideas was called the VAC theory. And that is that we take in information through one of our senses. Okay? Like dogs, right? How do dogs get information? They get it through their nose. They smell other dogs. They're always smelling something, right? They smell the owner. They even say that dogs can smell fear. So if you're afraid of a dog, he can smell it. It's kind of interesting. Now, humans take in information only through three senses: the eyes, the ears, and the hands. And so, what this theory states is that all your students are visual they take information through the eyes, auditory, they take in information through the ears, or kinesthetic, they take in information through the hands by touching it. Okay? And there's lots of evidence that this is true. Okay? For example, visual people tend to speak quicker, and when you ask them questions, their eyes go up. If they're thinking of the future, their eyes go up and to the left, like this. And they give you a visual description. It looks good to me. And if you ask them a question like, tell me about your town, they will give you a visual description. Oh, it was very big. It was very beautiful. An auditory learner, their eyes move to the side of their head. Okay? And they give you auditory words. Oh, that sounds good. They speak a little slower. Okay? And they give you an auditory description. If you said, tell me about your town, they would say, oh, it was very quiet place. There weren't a lot of people. And their eyes are at the side. Kinesthetic people speak even slower and their eyes go down. And they say things like, it feels good to me. And if you asked them to describe something, they would give you a kinesthetic description. Oh, my town was very cold. The people weren't very warm. Okay? They use language. They use descriptions that are kinesthetic. So all of your students, some of them are more visual. Your visual students prefer the eyes. They want to see the pictures. They want to see the book. They want to see the movie. The auditory learners, they want to hear the tape. They want to talk to their friends, okay? They want to do anything with their ears and listening. And the kinesthetic students, well, they want to do things with their hands. They want to touch things. They want to play a game where they throw the ball and so on. So this psychology was taken out into many other contexts. Like there was a businessman named Tony Robbins. He's very famous in America. And he wrote a business book on how to improve your life by knowing this visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. There's a famous psychologist in America named Tracy Cabot, and she uses these theories to help marriages and relationships. For example, she says most men, I think like 80% of men, are visual. That's why they're always looking at women that walk by. But a lot of women are auditory. So the woman will say, you never listen to me. And the man will say, I see what you mean. You see, so men are more visual, women more auditory or kinesthetic, and so that makes a problem in the relationship. Now, two educators, Susan Revell and Tracy Norman, they took these theories and they put them in education. And they were actually TEFL teachers. Okay? They taught languages. And they took these ideas and how to put them into the language classroom. So they had two books in 1997 and 1999. One was called Handing Over, and the other was called In My Hands. And these books were how to apply these learning styles, visual, kinesthetic, and auditory, into the TEFL classroom, into the English classroom. So they're very good books to read. But that is another popular learning style theory. Okay. And the last theory is a cognitive theory. It's a very old theory, okay? And it's kind of that right brain and left brain thing. So it only says there's two types of learners. There's an analytical learner, okay, which is more left brain and thinks logically. And there's a right brain learner that thinks more globally. So the right brain student is more creative, more active, okay? And they want to be around people. They want to know the language, how it fits together. Whereas the analytical learner wants to take the language apart. They want to see the grammar. They want to see the structure. Okay? And they prefer to work by themselves. They want to see things in sequence. Now, this is much more difficult to help us as our class, because we can't just say, okay, all you people are logical and all you people are more personal people. It's hard. It's hard to use that theory. However, I have used it. It comes in handy. For example, if I teach a business class and they're scientists, I know they're going to be more logical than personal. So I'm going to teach more grammar in that class because I know that's what they want to see. But if I taught, say, at a university level, the students might be more personal. They're there to see their friends. So I'm going to teach less of the grammar structure and more, using it with other people. Another reason why this theory isn't very popular, because we know as language teachers, the students must use the language to acquire it. You can't study a language. You must use it. Just like riding a bike or dancing or any other skill. Language is a skill. You have to use it. So if our students are analytical and they want to sit and just study the language, they're not going to be able to speak it. So you end up taking your analytical learners and turning them into more global or personal learners. Okay? Because that's what we have to do to be successful English teachers. So the cognitive theory is no longer popular, especially in the language classroom. The VAC theory, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, is a lot more popular with teachers. And there are many books. There's an educator named Mark Helgeson, and he lives in Japan now. He works at one of the Japanese universities, and he's written many books on activities, how to change them to different things. So if you have a visual activity, how to change it into an auditory activity. So he's got a lot of books. Mark Helgeson, recommend those if you're interested in that theory. And of course, MIT, the most important theory, there's lots of books out there. In fact, course books are now being written in that style. So you'll see one activity might show a lot of pictures, and then there'll be a listing activity, and then there'll be a role play, because it's trying to apply to all the students' different learning styles. Okay, and those are the three theories behind learning styles. And of course, this session mainly focused on multiple intelligence because that's the big one that's very important in the world. Okay. Are there any questions about the cognitive theory or the perceptual theory? Or maybe the intelligence theory? Sashmita has a question.
I have no question as such.
So you have no question.
Yeah, it's understood very clearly, Mike. Thank you so much. I request anyone.
I hope I didn't speak too fast. I've had a couple coffees, so maybe I'm talking too
You're
fast.
in a cafe, you can enjoy the coffee as well. And
Yes.
others who attended the session, do you have any queries, any questions?
No, ma'am.
Yes, please
Thank you.
ask.
Yeah. Yes,
Yes.
Raman. Yes, Raman, do you have anything, any question to be asked to Mike?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. No.
Okay,
I hope
well-
you understood everything what's been explained.
I hope if you take anything away from this session, that you look at your students in a different way next time. Next time you go into the classroom, if the students are doing an activity quietly, sit back and say to yourself, what is that student's learning style? Okay? Once you start to learn how to guess the different learning styles, then you'll have that knowledge and you'll be able to plan your lessons better or help your students when you have classroom management problems.
Right.
Okay, and that's all I have to say for today.
Yeah, I hope we can wind up now, Mike. I think they don't
Sure,
have
yeah.
any more queries. And thank you once again for a wonderful session. Hope to meet you soon and very soon.
You're very
Take-
welcome. Namaste, everybody.
Namaste. Take care. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.